Welcome to Mpowered Living. I'm Ann Sheu. On this podcast, innovative leaders and visionary experts share insights and practical tools for work, family, and marriage. Each episode, we'll explore how to elevate your life while staying grounded in what truly matters to you. You're working hard to navigate relationships, build a thriving family, and create a legacy of purpose. We're here to help you do that with confidence and intentionality. So if you're ready to live a life by design, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Mpowered Living, the podcast where we explore the habits and conversations that help us build more intentional, resilient lives. I'm your host, Ann Sheu, and today we're diving into the early years of parenting, where so much of our children's emotional, social, and cognitive development begins. My guest today is Jill Getto Lee, an early childhood educator, RIE associate, and parenting coach who has guided countless families, including my own, in building deep, trusting relationships with their children from the very beginning. Jill is passionate about the first 2 years of a child's life, when the brain is most plastic, and how early relationships shape our lifelong ability to connect, self-regulate, and problem solve. In this episode, we talk about what really happens in the brain during a child's first 2 years, how to balance boundaries and freedom through the RIE Educaring approach, the long-term benefits of uninterrupted play and slowing down, and what to do if you weren't raised this way, and how to start parenting this way if you choose. This conversation is a beautiful reminder that parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, observation, and connection. Whether you're raising a baby, parenting older kids, or just curious about the way early experiences shape who we are, there's so much to take away. Let's dive in. Hey, Jill, it's so great to have you here today.
Hi, Ann. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, let's just dive in because I have so much I want to talk to you about today. So let's first start by talking about how early relationships really shape a child's development. Can you talk a little bit about that and the work that you do and why it's so important?
Sure. Well, the first 2 years of life are the greatest amount of brain plasticity. And what does that mean? That means it's the greatest amount of brain formation. And it starts happening in utero. You know, this miraculous plan of development. And it's so complex that we can't humanly duplicate it. It's mathematically complex. And so all of this development starts happening in utero. And the earliest experiences have the greatest influence on us. So the way our brain is organized is formed in the first 2 years of life. And so this educaring approach is a therapeutic way to raise children. And so it focuses on the first 2 years of life. But it starts in utero. The development starts in utero. When you're born with 30% of your brain. And so in the first 2 years, your attitude develops. How you solve problems develops. Your attitude develops. And how you view the world, which is so important. That view of the world you refer to over and over again every day of your life is formed within the first 2 years. So how your brain is organized after those first 2 years, there's a pruning that happens. So we know we have synapses in the brain. Some people call them learning connections, that electrical impulse that makes a pathway. So the pathways that get used the most get a protected status. And the ones that don't have a protected status get pruned out at around 2 years old. So those first 2 years are really forming your subconscious. And the right hemisphere is really coming online at birth. You know, it's all about the relationships and how things relate in their environment. And what I've learned from Dr. Ann Sheu is that you really want the right hemisphere of the brain to be lateralized. And that means dominant. And that really forms a healthy development.
Okay, so talk to me about what that means. What does lateralize mean and how can we do that?
So lateralized means dominant. One hemisphere is dominant, and you want the right hemisphere to be lateralized because that is how things relate to each other. The left hemisphere is keeping lists and keeping track of items. But if you don't have the relationship piece, how things relate in the world, then you're missing that. So Ian McGilchrist talks about the right hemisphere as the wisdom of the whole, and the left hemisphere is the knowledge of the parts. And so it's all about the relationship in the earliest years, loving relationships with adults.
So, if you were to sum it up with 2 or 3 actionable things that parents can do to really help develop that right hemisphere, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
Well, I would say focusing on the caregiving activities. That's really the relationship building, slowing down, involving the child, saying what you're doing before you do it, letting it land, joining their world, bringing them back to the task at hand, being present when you're with the child in the caregiving activities. You can't give 100% of your attention all of the time. That would not work. But to be 100% present during the diaper changes or during the caregiving activities, then those can become therapeutic interactions because they're really relationship building. And that speaks to the right hemisphere as well.
So, what would you tell parents that are listening who have kids that are older than 2 years? Is it just too late for them? Like, what if if they've kind of missed the boat on the first 2 years, what now?
Well, it's never too late. It's never too late. And even though our brain is plastic, especially in those first 2 years, and the neurons can move around and then they're pruned out and synapses are pruned out, the neurons can stay in place, which means there can always be a pathway that's formed. So there's always hope. But it's never too late for loving, caring relationships. And I've been studying with Bruce Perry also, and his work is also very amazing. And he talks about all these therapeutic interventions that can actually help create new brain structure. You can never erase old experiences, but you can create new ones that can kind of overpower the older ones. But those earliest experiences are so important.
Okay, so let's talk about those early experiences. What strategies do you recommend to really support the emotional health and well-being of infants, toddlers in those first 2 years?
Well, I think first of all, when a woman is pregnant or a couple is expecting a baby, we have all of these ideas about who our child is going to be. I have twin boys, and I remember thinking when I was pregnant, I can't wait for them to take piano lessons. They're going to be such good musicians. Let me tell you, that did not work out that way. So I guess what I'm saying is we have an imagined vision of what our baby is going to be when we're expecting. And then, or adopting, whenever a child comes into our life, we have images of who this baby is. And then there's the real baby and, that unique human being. And then we have to reconcile our images with who that baby really is. And that's what leads to attunement. If we can't reconcile those differences, we're always trying to get that child to fit into our image of who we wanted them to be, rather than seeing them for who they are and what are their interests, what's their unique way of communicating, what are they interested in. So I think reconciling those images from the very beginning is important in fostering attunement with the child and parent.
So interesting. So, what are some signs that we might be projecting what we wanted in a child onto our child? Like, what are some key things that we can look for as parents to know that we might be doing this, and we might be kind of going down this path of not being in attunement with our child?
Right. And that information just doesn't come to you like through osmosis.
Yeah.
You have to observe the child. So we always recommend with the Educaring approach, observing your child, at least for some time of the day, but to really observe your child to get to know them for who they really are. And so when you're observing your child, you get to know their unique way of communicating. You get to know what their interests are. What toys are they choosing to play with? The cries mean different things. What are their cues when they get hungry before the cry starts to happen? So when you're really observing your child, that's where you're starting to see them for who they really are, and you can reconcile those differences. I think that's one of the ways that you can gain trust in their abilities as well. That just doesn't come to you. It comes through sensitive observation and getting to know the child.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the educaring approach. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that is a big part of your work. And when I got to work with you, when you were coaching me and Sunny in our early parenting phase, it was so transformational for us. So I would love for you to just spend a little bit of time sharing about the educaring approach, what it is, how it's different, and the impact that it has on the relationships.
Well, the educaring approach is kind of a joke amongst associates. I'm a RI associate, and it's a joke because we say, how can you sum it up? We say, what is your elevator explanation? We're in an elevator and somebody says, oh, you're with Magda Gerber's educaring approach. What is that? And you start to talk and then the door opens. It's or we're just kind of dumbfounded because and we would talk about why is this so hard to explain? And we realized it's because it's a way of being. It's a way of being with children. And so we focus on the first 2 years of life because that is the greatest amount of brain development. And it's a therapeutic way to raise children so they feel seen and heard. And it consists of 7 basic principles. But parents love it because they find it helps them to parent. They don't feel lost as a parent. I know when I came to it, I never felt lost as a parent. It does make parenting easier, I think, because of that. But it's a way, of sharing the power with your child.
Yeah. When people used to ask me about it, I
Mhm.
would say that it was seeing the child as whole, resourceful, competent, and like a human being and not like a doll, how most people see their
Right.
babies as dolls, like, oh my gosh, she's
Yes.
so cute. And so I don't know, does that resonate
Yes.
with you? That's what I
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great elevator description, Anne. No, that definitely resonates with me because we do have a tendency, we can objectify babies. And it's in a way, it could be easy, right? Because they are cute. Babies are cute and they're meant to be endearing to us so that we bond with them. They attach to us. However, what they're doing and what they're capable of is so meaningful. It's so much more than cute. So something that is very unique to the educaring approach is we know, one, that babies are born with a level of competency. And the second thing is that babies have a point of view. So, when we talk about it, Magda Gerber would say, parents, adults will talk to their pets
Hmm.
more than they will talk to their babies. And, I was thinking about that when she said that. And I was thinking, what does that mean exactly? Why do adults do that? Why do people do that? And I think it has to do with language. They know a dog will never talk, right? So they learn their dog's cues. They watch their dog. They understand their dog. But because a baby can't speak, they're born with the intent to communicate. But of course, they don't have language yet. That people think they have no understanding. They have no comprehension. And they are born with a level of competency. If you say what you're doing before you do it and go slowly, give it time to land, you'll see a cue. You'll see how they will gaze right into your eyes and want to connect. And they have a level of comprehension. So those are two main things about the approach. And it's
Yeah.
about sharing the power. It's not permissive parenting, and it's not authoritarian parenting. It's in the middle. It's in the middle somewhere, but it's about sharing the power with the child.
Oh, talk to me about the difference between permissive parenting and authoritarian parenting and how that's different from the educaring approach.
Okay, so we're in the middle somewhere, like I just said, right? And it's about sharing the power. It's holding boundaries because children need boundaries to feel secure. So it's about holding boundaries, but it's also about sharing the power. When I say that, an example would be during the caregiving activities, we want to make them an active participant, right? So you're saying what you're doing before you do it. They're lifting their legs and then they look away, let's say, and you don't just keep going, right? You go slowly and you join their world and you're genuinely, authentically curious about what are you looking at? And I see that cobweb in the corner of my wall. I never noticed that before. Now I want to put the Velcro down on your diaper and we bring them back to the task at hand. So it's not rigid. right? It's fluid and it's sharing the power that they're important too, that they have a point of view and that we're valuing their opinions and their choices while we hold boundaries. And I think part of why parenting is so challenging is that, we always try to control our children, and you can't control anybody other than yourself. And these children that are raised with this approach learn that early on and through their experience with their peers. But you can't control anybody other than yourself. And that's true because I've tried it. It doesn't work. You can't do it. So it's how do we work together? There are definitely like red light situations where it's a true boundary. It's not going to happen. And that's okay. The child can express their emotions. Feelings are never wrong. They can express it for as long as they need to express it. And you still hold the boundary. So that's where it's in the middle. I would say it's about sharing the power. So it's holding boundaries. There are like 3 situations: a green light situation where they can do, it's fine. You have nothing at stake. They want to stay longer at the park. You have the time. Fine. They can stay longer at the park. A red light situation. The ball rolls into the street or you're walking on the sidewalk, usually for safety. No, stop. It's an absolute no, right? They cannot do it. It's a boundary. And then there's a yellow light situation. And that's where parents can get really frustrated and not know what to do. And the yellow light situation is like, well, it's a negotiation, the art of negotiating. Well, I have to get home in an hour. You want to stay at the park longer. Well, we can stay maybe 15 minutes longer. It's a negotiation. And that's where we're in the middle. And it's a therapeutic way, again, to raise children so they feel seen and heard and have a strong sense of self.
Yeah. So, what would you recommend for parents that are listening that are curious? They are interested in this approach, but they weren't raised this way. So, it was never modeled for them, right? They were either raised with a very permissive parent or a very authoritarian parent. And, you know, I think those are easier. It's safer. It's right. You're talking about in the middle, there's this gray area. You have to practice these negotiation skills. You need to think about the other person. You can't just black or white one way or the other. And so if a parent is listening and they're curious and they might be interested in trying this, how do they even start developing these skills as an adult, as a parent, when it's never been modeled for them before?
And that's a really good question, Ann, right? So it takes a while to get it. So I would say first start reading books. There's a lot of books on the Educaring approach from Magda Gerber. There's Dear Parent, there's Baby Knows Best. There's a lot of different books. If you went to the RIE website, you would see it. However, you can read and learn about it and intellectualize it and learn about it, but then it takes time to internalize and to practice. So what I would say is most of us, we have our implicit knowledge, right? We know how we were cared for as babies. So we have that in us. We have that knowledge intrinsically inside of us. And then we have our extrinsic knowledge, how we see babies cared for on social media, on television, in our extended family members, our neighbors, in the parks. We have an idea of how to care for babies by what we see externally. And if we don't seek out new and more information, we're limited to having to draw from either our intrinsic or extrinsic knowledge because that's all we have. So I would say seek out more information. The more information you can get reading, some classes, the more information you have, the more choices you're able to make. So yeah, seek out information.
Okay, so I want to go back to something you talked about earlier. You said there's 7 principles of RIE, of the Educaring approach. And I know that one of the principles is about uninterrupted play, letting them have this self-initiated play for their, physical and their mental development. And so what I would like to talk about is how do you find the balance between this uninterrupted play and healthy level of engagement and activity that is planned by the parent? Because I think there is, you mentioned it earlier. What do you see on social media and movies and TV about what it looks like to be a good parent? Well, it looks like doing like reading to them and taking them to activities and taking them to the music class and to the gym class and doing all these things, right? And so
Yes.
getting this information from external sources about what it looks like to be a good parent, how do you raise a smart, healthy baby, and balancing that with giving them uninterrupted playtime.
Well, babies don't need to be overstimulated, right? We don't need to teach babies things because if you believe they come into the world with their own plan of development, right? I remember, I wasn't thinking when I was pregnant, okay, I have to form my son's hearts now. And now today I have to form the kidneys, thank goodness, right? That's a natural plan of development that's happening, this miraculous plan beyond my conscious level, right? It's just all happening. And so then when the baby is born, for some reason in the American society, we think, oh, there's no plan of development. The baby can't do anything, even though it just completely formed, without my really thinking about it. So we want to support that natural plan of development. So what babies need is they need to be in a loving relationship with adults who adore them. They don't need to be overscheduled. They don't need to be going to gym classes and all these other classes. They don't have to have that. So they need to attach to an adult. They need to form a secure attachment to one adult. They come into the world to do that, to form an attachment and to make sense of their environment. They're brand new into the world. This is all new. So how do these things relate? And it's the right hemisphere of the brain that's really coming online now, really forming. And so what are the relationships with things in their environment and how they relate to things? So they fill up with the adult during the caregiving activities. If you give 100% of your time to the baby during the caregiving activities, Magda Gerber would say it's better to give 100% of your attention 50% of the time than 50% of your attention 100% of the time. And I can vouch for that because having twins, right, I could have constantly split my attention and neither one of them would have filled up with me. And I wouldn't have gotten to know each one of them for the unique person they are. So they can fill up with the adult during the caregiving activities when they're slow, reciprocal, responsive, and respectful. They really fill up with you when you're caring for them, dressing them, feeding them, bathing them. That's where it's these loving interactions. If you think about it, some of the best memories can be when you were cared for, when someone thought of you and cared for you. And that's what stays with you. And so that's how they fill up with the adult. And then when they're filled up with the adult, they can have uninterrupted playtime. Now, they can have uninterrupted playtime starting at around 3 months, but that definitely is contingent on setting up a 100% safe space. If you don't have a 100% safe space, then then it's interrupted playtime because you have to say, no, not here. Don't do that. Don't touch this. And so that safe space is really wonderful because then that child has complete freedom, in this partitioned off space where it's completely safe. Sometimes I ask parents, how's your safe space coming? They're creating it. And they'll say, well, it's great. It's almost safe. And I'll say, well, that's not quite safe, right? So 99.999 safe space is not a safe space. It has to be 100% safe. Sibling free, pet free, nothing can be pulled down. Everything can be put in their mouth because it will be. You get a lot of information that way as a baby.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how this approach has a long-term benefit of teaching problem solving. Because I know that as a parent, I have a tendency to jump in, save the day, be the hero, rescue, right? It's hard to see
Right.
our children struggling. And so I know this one thing that I really appreciated about this approach was helping me slow down and give them time to work through it, to figure it out on their own. So, yeah, maybe talk a little bit about how this affects children long term and their ability to problem solve.
Well, I think that it makes them feel confident in their problem solving skills. And most of all, I think it makes them enjoy the challenge. And we know that no matter who you are, life has challenges, right? Life isn't easy. There's going to be challenges sometimes. So how do you take on those challenges? Do you feel defeated? Do you feel like I can't do it alone? I have to have help. I'm not enough. Or do you feel like, you know, I can take this on and I can solve it, overcome it, whatever it is. I am enough. I'm competent to do it. And you mentioned, Ann, slowing down is so important, right? So it has to be a safe environment, but you want to scaffold their learning. So in other words, you want to facilitate their problem solving skills. And when you facilitate the problem solving skills, right, then that way you keep them in the problem longer and they have more opportunity to figure out how to do it. And then when they accomplish it, they can feel that sense of accomplishment. And then they own that and they know, yeah, I can do it. And so to scaffold, I can give a simple example. If a child's holding like a jar with a lid and it's in there as a toy, because we love open-ended play objects, without batteries, because there's so much you can do with that. And let's say the lid's on a little too tight and the child absolutely can't get it off. And they come over to the parent and they're like, help, or can you get it off? And then instead of the parent, just rushing in and doing it or telling their child, well, turn it like this, right? Which you can do that, but then the child doesn't have the opportunity to figure it out on their own. So if you slow it down, you want to get the lid off. I see you're a little frustrated. I wonder how you can do that, and just slow it down and think together. And then they're trying and they can't get it off. And it's okay to experience some frustration, right? Life has a lot of frustration in it. And so this is how we build resilience, having small doses of stress, small doses of frustration in a safe environment. And you're right there, right? So it's building that capacity. And they still can't get it off. Let's see. What if I loosen it a little bit? And then you loosen it a little bit. Now what can you do? And then they can figure it out. So you want to add a little help, a little more help, a little more help until they accomplish that task on their own. They solve the problem on their own. And then we know, right, from Vygotsky and early childhood development theorists, we know that what they can do with a little bit of help from an adult or an older peer, they'll be able to do on their own tomorrow, right, in the future.
That's beautiful. So, do you have what are some of your favorite stories from when you've led classes? I can't remember what you call classes, but
The parent-infant guidance classes.
yes. So, what are some fun stories, some memorable instances from your parent-infant classes that you've led?
Oh my goodness. I have a lot. So I have to think about which one. Okay. I have several favorites. But one that there's two that come to mind right off. One is the other day, there's a gate into our room of the safe space, and the gate opened up and the parent was coming in with their daughter, and this young girl just ran all the way across the room, ran right up to me and just gave me a big hug. I have to tell you, that was like so heartwarming. That was so lovely. So that was really moving for me. And just, it's so amazing how they do solve problems and how they connect with each other. We had two children, the other day, a young girl and a boy, and they came close to each other, like their heads just coming close. And what did that feel like to be close to a peer? And the looks on their face of just like the energy of each other coming close. And it feels so good, right, to be well received from a peer. And so that was that was memorable. And also there was this one time when as toys, I have three smaller plastic light bowling pins, and the children love to take them. I lay them, 3 of them flat, and then they love to take them and bang on this wooden box that we have, and that's very empowering, right? They can feel their power and their strength. And the 3 bowling pins were on top of this wooden shelf. And there was this young boy, and he was trying to reach over the shelf to get the bowling pins, and he just couldn't get them. And so he kept banging the shelf, and it would make the bowling pins vibrate, and they would come closer to his hand, and he'd go to grab it, and they'd roll back.
Oh.
And he did that. He was so persistent and wanted to get those bowling pins. He did that for about 20 minutes straight. And just think of the attention span and the persistence. And he didn't get it. And finally he went down, and he went and decided to play with something else. But it was his choice. How beautiful to see when he was ready to pursue something else, not the adults saying, okay, or handing it to them. All that would have been lost. But just the tenacity and persistence and the will was really remarkable and impressive.
Yeah. What are some big transformations that you've seen either in the child or in the parent-child relationship? Because I know a lot of these in your parent-infant classes, they're with you for a year or 2 years. Talk to me about some of the biggest transformations that you've seen with them just coming and spending an hour with you a week in this class. What did it look like at the beginning? And then after being in this environment, being exposed to the Educaring approach, and then a year later, 2 years later, what does it look like for them?
It's a huge transformation, I would say, for pretty much any parent, because not a lot of us have been parented this way. I wasn't necessarily parented exactly like this. A lot of this information was new to me. When I heard it, it was obvious, because it makes sense. It's like, why wouldn't I think of that? But I wouldn't have thought of that unless I had heard it. So the transformations are big. The classes are as much for the parents as they are for the children. And because what the class really is too, as a facilitator, I'm modeling the approach with the children. So I'm modeling it so the parents are learning the approach, so they can also, they do it during the week. And they love coming to class because it's like a muscle that you work. But the attunement is, so much better, and they enjoy the relationship with their child more. They enjoy being a parent more. It makes it more enjoyable because, it's interesting. This might be diverting a little bit, but I'm thinking of something that my son told me. One of my sons said, once he was older, he said, Mom, our relationship, it's different than like my friends. It's like they talk to their parents, but it's like they don't really know each other. And he said, it's just different than how we are. Like now my sons are 20 and they're coming to me and saying, we never had a time out. They feel like they were left out of something. We weren't punished. We didn't have a time out. And it's like, well, no. And, but, it makes it the biggest transformation I've seen, I would have to make a generalization, is that parents enjoy their children. They enjoy being parents. I had a father the other day say to me, it's so much easier than I thought.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean it's easy, right? Parenting takes all of you, no matter how many children you have. But he said, it's easier than I thought. And he loves, being a parent. He loves being a father. So the transformation I see is less stress, more enjoyment.
Mhm.
And you see the quality of the relationship between the parent and the child. And that's usually what brings people to this approach. They have friends that they love the relationship between them and their child. And so they're curious and they want that relationship with their child.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. So
Okay.
the friends, the nannies, the teachers, the caregivers that are in your world as a parent, if I am interested in the educating approach, how do I start educating the people that are part of our village, that are helping raise the child, that are in my child's life, especially when so many of them are kind of, quite frankly, set in their ways already, right? Like
Yes.
they know what has worked for them in the past and how they've interacted with kids in the past. And so introducing this educating approach could be a very different concept to a lot of people. And how do we how do we introduce it in a way that isn't confrontational and maybe even, not even disrespectful? I could see some people might think it's disrespectful. Like if I'm telling a grandmother or a nanny or another child care provider, hey, you're doing it wrong. I want you to do it this
Right,
way instead.
right, right.
What is your advice there? How do you start and how do you tackle it in a way that is effective?
Well, first I would say, don't say they're doing it wrong. Don't do what you just said, Ann. That would be number one. Well, first of all, we do have a nurturing nanny course. We have courses that help introduce these ideas. And I also want to say, this approach is not for everyone, and that's fine. And it's not an all or nothing approach. If something doesn't fit your way of parenting, then you just don't use it. If it resonates with you, then you use it. So, and there's lots of good ways to parent. Magda Gerber would say there's lots of good ways to parent. This is one good way. I obviously really believe in it, and that's why I teach it. However, you have to meet people where they're at as well. And the best way for anyone to learn is to model it.
Mm.
Right. So that would be my first, thing to say. There's books. Like I said, there's classes. We have the Nurturing Nanny course. We have the Foundations course. We have a Before Baby course. We have courses for, that will help support nannies and caregivers in learning this approach. But it's, we don't want to ever make anyone feel criticized, and we don't want to alienate anyone. So the best way for someone to learn it is to model it. And what usually happens is people say, whoa, how did you get your child to do that? People used to ask me all the time at the park, how did you get your sons to be so competent? How did you get your sons to do this? You just sit back and watch, and I would have to think about, well, I didn't really teach them how to do those things. They learned it on their own, but I did things to support it. But that's usually what interests people in learning about the approach. And your child knows too, it's going to be maybe different at grandma's house or grandpa's house than it is at home. And that's just fine, right? You talk about that. How did it make you feel when grandma kept wanting you to eat more and you told her you were full? Why do you think she does that? Yeah, she's just worried about you, right? She wants to make sure you've had enough. Maybe she doesn't think you know when you feel full, right? You have a conversation about it and you model seeing it from the other person's point of view. So it's empathetic, not critical. And it's modeling empathy, and you have a conversation about it, and children learn. We do it this way in my house. It's different at grandma's house. It's different at school. It's different at the library. It's right. There are different rules in different settings. But I would say to model it, get some materials, reading materials, maybe get into a course is helpful. But the number one rule too is you don't want to alienate anybody. That's, you just have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's fine. You have the biggest influence on your child. What was that?
I'm very guilty of that, alienating people.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Telling them I don't want them to talk to my kid that way. Well, what for the parents that have older kids, talk to me about how this approach translates to your interactions with older kids.
You can't help it. It's a trickle down effect, right? Because it's a way of being with children, maybe with people. For me, I can talk about my personal experience. It honestly felt like taking blinders off, and changed my view of the world, right? And it changed my interactions. And so because it's a way of being. If you have a younger child and you're slowing down, you're saying what you're doing before you're doing it, you're involving them in the process, they're active participants, you're curious about who they are, you have a dialogue with them, even when they don't have language, you're talking with them, you can hear it's a proto-conversation, it's in the rhythm of a conversation. Babies have strong intentions and they're communicating. And so, because of that carries over. You maybe start to change how you interact with your older child, or you start to see things in a different way, or you start noticing things about your older child that you didn't notice before. So it's a trickle down effect. It spills over into everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
into other relationships.
That's beautiful. All right. It's been amazing chatting with you today. I wish we had another 3 or 4 hours, honestly. I feel like we could do a deep dive on each of those RIE principles. And
We
um,
could, we certainly could.
this approach has been transformational for my parenting, for my approach, my relationship with my kids, and I'm still using it today. So I appreciate you so much. Appreciate you
Well, thank you, Ann.
me and guiding
Thank
me
you.
so early in my parenting. So
Thank you. I
before
appreciate your
we
kind words.
yeah, before we leave, I would love for you to just share a little bit about how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in doing one of your classes, if they're interested in doing coaching with you. How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, I would love that. That's wonderful. I have a phone number you can call, 818-370-6. I have a website. It's my name, jgettolee.com. You can reach me there. My email is jgettolee@gmail.com. So one of those ways would be wonderful.
And we'll drop all those links into the show notes as well so that people will have access to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Ann.
Thank you
It's
so much. No, thank you so much for joining us today. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks for tuning in to Empowered Living. I hope today's conversation sparked some inspiration and gave you tools to live more intentionally in your family, work, and life. If you enjoyed our episode today, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story or actionable takeaway. And if you know someone who would love this episode, share it with them, because living an intentional life is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, the life you want doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. Let's keep creating it one step at a time.